Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Itential webinar, where we will be discussing how to deliver turnkey infrastructure automation with the Itential ServiceNow app. My name is Rich Martin, and I'm part of the technical marketing department here at Itential, and I'm happy to have you guys join. So before we get right into the demo, I think it's important that we just kind of cover a few slides here to cover what the Itential ServiceNow app is. So from a 35,000-foot view, this is an application that employs codeless integration that allows ServiceNow users to run network and infrastructure automations published in the automation platform. So this is a bridge. It bridges the gap between what teams do in the Itential platform, building awesome network automations and running them there. And it allows now those automations to be run within ServiceNow, and exposing them to an entirely new group of users, the ServiceNow user, not the network engineering or automation team. It allows dynamic discovery of these published automations, whether they're new or updated, and we'll walk through that, which is a really big deal, and we'll talk about those details in a moment. The idea here is to make it simple to scale the use of automation, specifically infrastructure automation built within the Itential platform, to ServiceNow users, and really from a user perspective or from a technical perspective, whether you're the ServiceNow admin or developer or a network automation engineer or the network engineer, making it super simple and easy for those teams to work together in order to do this. And ultimately, organizations are looking for a clear, simple, concise way to deliver self-service for end-to-end automations, and reducing manually opening a bunch of tickets on the back end in order to accomplish, some IT service request. And this is a fantastic way to take really, really, really solid steps towards that end. So now let's pause a moment and talk about what this is, because if you're already a user of Itential, or even if you're not a user of Itential, but you're aware of how we do integrations and our ability to integrate both network devices into an automation, or network controllers into automation, but as well as IT systems into an automation, you've already heard of the term integration. So this new application is something quite different, but it actually shares some very common traits. And so I think it's important that we level set everybody to understand the differences between the two. So let's start on the left-hand side with integration. You'll see here, I'm representing the Itential platform and the ServiceNow platform, right? And I said earlier in the last slide, this is a great way to bridge these two, the gap between these two. So at the integration side of things is, an integration exists and lives and is installed in the Itential platform. So you can think of it as, we have a way of doing it codelessly as well, bringing integrations in so that once that integration, in this particular instance, it's ServiceNow, a ServiceNow integration is brought into the Itential platform. The Itential platform itself is now able to consume ServiceNow services. So what are those services? Well, because we're leveraging ServiceNow APIs within the integration now that is installed into the Itential platform, those services are anything that the ServiceNow API exposes to the end user and that we have access to. So why is this helpful? Because now when a network engineer builds an automation in the Itential platform using the ServiceNow integration, they have access to all of these API commands, which become tasks into a workflow. You can think of steps or boxes in a workflow that can do things that are commonly done manually. So things like opening a ticket, updating a ticket, closing a ticket, running queries against tables within ServiceNow. All of these things, because of the ServiceNow integration that is now put into the Itential platform, are opened up to folks building workflows and automations in our platform. So that's what an integration does. You can think of it as terms of enabling Itential to use the services of ServiceNow. So Itential becomes a bit of a super user, and really it's the automations that become the super user here. So that's an integration. Now, what about on the right-hand side, the application? So we'll start again with these platforms. You have the Itential platform and the ServiceNow platform. In this case, things are a little bit different. The the Itential ServiceNow application is installed in the ServiceNow platform. So it's part of the ServiceNow ecosystem. So it's installed there, and it allows ServiceNow platform to consume Itential services. So it's going the other way. So now ServiceNow becomes the super user, if you will, of whatever those services that Itential can provide to the ServiceNow platform and their users. And in this case, it's automations that have been published by the networking teams, right? So the networking teams build automations, test automations, run automations, and then they can publish them for use. And in this case, this application allows them to be used inside the ServiceNow platform by ServiceNow users. This also uses APIs, but in this case, ServiceNow is leveraging the APIs that we expose in the Itential platform. And this is critical because it allows some really, really awesome features and functions to occur that help, again, drive self-service to be much, much easier with little to no code, or no code in this case, being able to dynamically identify and generate forms, dynamically identify automations. And we'll take a closer look at that too. But so now you can think of it this way. ServiceNow users, once this application is installed and configured in the ServiceNow platform by the ServiceNow admin, those users can be configured. Users of ServiceNow within their dashboard can be configured to have access to automations that make changes on the network. So you can deploy or provision a new service, network service. You can have automations that can update or remove network services, right? Effectively taking them back down, or create, or update new cloud services. Really anything you want to build within the Itential platform as a useful automation for self-service can now be run by the ServiceNow user. So how does this ServiceNow application help you? Well, hopefully I've hinted at that already, more than hinted at that. But let's look at it again from a more general point of view. What are IT organizations trying to do? They want to be more cloud-like in their ability to deliver new IT services, right? So even for something like an application, if somebody's saying, hey, I'm an application user, I need this application, or even I need connectivity to an existing application, that requires changes to the network, and really probably updates and changes to all types of IT infrastructure. Could be compute, could be cloud, could be storage, could be network. The idea here is, how do IT organizations reduce the time it takes for them to reduce that? And by doing that, one way they do that is by publishing these automations so that they can be run by users in ServiceNow. So this is the whole self-service concept. If I can have the user who's ordering something have access to an automation that allows them to order it right there, instead of opening up a ticket, asking a bunch of different departments to coordinate together, that automation it starts to look a lot like the way things are done in the cloud. And so now IT automation is really as effective as cloud, and to the end user, maybe it's even transparent. Whether it's cloud or it's on-prem, doesn't really matter. Eliminate the integration overhead between ServiceNow and network teams. How do we make it a smooth working environment between, in this case, ServiceNow teams and networking teams? In this case, previous to this application existing, it would take custom code, and really, even before you get to the custom code, a lot of discussions to determine how this integration needs to work. What are the APIs involved? How do we make this thing work? And we call that the integration overhead, because once you've built the integration, you still got to manage it, right? So if something changes, in one platform or another, the integration might have to change. So ServiceNow developers are super busy. I'm going to take a guess. They probably don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time managing a bunch of integrations when they have real applications that they have to build. And again, scaling the infrastructure automation across the enterprise is key. Ask your boss, ask your boss's boss. If they can make their IT organization look more like how cloud delivers services, that's what they want. And so this is key. This is a key component to helping you do that with the ServiceNow team. Okay, so for network teams, specifically for the networking teams, this is super valuable for you. Why? Because this ServiceNow app requires no custom code and no need to work with developers. And what I mean by that is, again, developers writing custom code to do integration takes time, but even before you get to that, you've got to map out exactly how this works for every single automation that you want published. So previous to that, that's what was required. And we've spoken to a lot of our customers, and they've said it's taken weeks, even months, in order to help, to coordinate between busy network teams, busy ServiceNow developer teams, to try to talk the same language to help them understand, on the networking side, the intricacies, the APIs, the things of that nature. And then, for the ServiceNow, for the network team to understand the ServiceNow side. So that's why this process has taken so long. And again, this all boils back down to, how do we just enable self-service in ServiceNow, because it's like the hub of all IT for many organizations. So also for network teams, if once this app is installed, you can start to integrate multiple IAP instances. So now, once those are configured, your IAP instances can publish any number of automations. You can say this IAP is for lab automation. This IAP is, or it could be regionally. We'll take a look at that too. This is an IAP for Europe, and this is an IAP for, US West or US East. You have the ability to tie in all of these different instances. Anything you publish inside of one of these onboarded IAP instances, any of these automations, can be dynamically discovered by the ServiceNow app. So it's in the same way that you go to Operations Manager, publish an automation, maybe update something with a new form, and it's just there, it's ready, it works. You click run manually and you can run. That functionality now immediately transfers into a ServiceNow dashboard. Same thing with forms. And this is a big deal, because if you want to talk about managing integration between ServiceNow and networking teams and having a lot of code, imagine managing changes with something simple like a form field changes. We need to update a form. So a form is the input for an automation that we need to run. The networking team builds that, the automation plus the form that's associated with it. And sometimes you add things to it, you add fields, add drop-down elements, things like that. If that form has to be custom created on the ServiceNow side, then those things always have to be in sync. They always have to match. So if I make a quick change on the Itential side for a form, and it doesn't match the ServiceNow side because of custom, it was customly built with custom code, that now has to be updated before you can run that automation in ServiceNow. With our app, we can dynamically generate the forms that were changed on the fly. So you're always up to date with whatever form was allocated to a published automation, and it gets generated in the ServiceNow platform immediately. So you've not only reduced it, you've just pushed it off the table. We don't need to go through those very time-consuming cycles. And you also have access control in Itential as a network engineer or a network automation engineer publishing these automations in Itential. Everything you have access to in the Operations Manager with publishing can, since that's the methodology that ServiceNow is going to detect and display those automations, all of those knobs and tools that you have to enable or disable or whatever you want are right there, and so you can continue to use that. For the ServiceNow team, again, this is bridging the gap between the two. For ServiceNow teams, it's very, very simple. There's a very standardized ServiceNow app installation. So this Itential app, ServiceNow app, is part of the ServiceNow ecosystem. We'll take a look at that in a minute. And you download it just like you download any other application. In fact, as a ServiceNow admin, you probably already have a lot of applications installed. So it's a very standardized process. It's certified by ServiceNow. So it's everything you're used to. And it takes just maybe a minute to configure everything. And once that's done, you're pretty much done. You don't have to worry about pulling in developers to build custom code, custom integrations. If automations change on the networking side, through the app, everything is dynamically discovered. And again, the forms are dynamically generated by a JSON schema that exists and is created on the Itential side, built by the networking team. And of course, finally, you also have, for ServiceNow admins, control based off of ServiceNow roles of who can and cannot have access and what kind of access they have to run these automations. So that gives a nice delineated, clean way of these two teams operating together without custom code and giving them their own functions and features and controls on each side. And so really that's what the app delivers. So now let's talk about the demo, and then we'll roll into that. Ultimately, I want you to see how all of these pieces and parts fit together. So what does that mean? That means that by the end of this, we'll build and publish a simplified automation in Itential, just so you can see how all of this fits together. We will talk through the installation of the Itential ServiceNow app. It's already installed on our platform. And again, this is something that the ServiceNow admin knows how to do, so we won't spend a lot of time there. We'll look at configuring access to the different IAP platforms and what that entails. How is that difficult? The answer is no, and we'll show you that. How we can dynamically discover any kind of the published automations using dynamic API calls, and also showing you how we pull in those forms and dynamically generate those forms in ServiceNow. And then ultimately, I'll show how to update an automation. We'll publish an automation. We'll update it. We'll show how it gets updated in ServiceNow. We'll run it. We'll do all those fun things to show kind of everything in one session. So with that, let me go and share my screen. So where do we start? Let's start with ServiceNow. So like I said, this Itential ServiceNow app is part of the ServiceNow ecosystem. So if you're a network engineer and this is something you want to start to integrate you want to publish and integrate into ServiceNow through the application so that ServiceNow users can run your automations, you would work with your ServiceNow admin, right? They would go to the ServiceNow store.servicenow.com, search for Itential. Here's your application. And then they would just click get here, and they would go through a standardized process of installing it within their ServiceNow platform. So it's that simple. Again, this is something they already have probably done dozens of times with other applications. It's a very rich environment for folks to develop applications. And this makes it super easy for us to, enter into that ServiceNow ecosystem as being, as publishing automations there. So it makes it super simple. So very easy to configure for there. Once they get that going, then what you'll see is now I'm in the ServiceNow dashboard. Okay. And I'm an admin in this dashboard, at least for this particular application. So what you'll find once they configure that, if I go under my all menu here, I'll see a section called Itential. And once I go to Itential, the first stop is how do we configure our instances in Itential. So our instances are IAP, or Itential Automation Platform. This is where you would build your, where your workflows in Automation Studio, where you would publish them and those things. So I already have 3 of them configured here for our demo, and they're configured for our lab and whatnot. But let's go ahead and configure one. So again, first step is networking. Somebody from the networking team would work with their ServiceNow admin, quickly download the app, install it. The admin would configure it. And then it appears here, again, under this Itential menu under ServiceNow. And then I go into IAP instances. And of course, there would be none to start with, but you would create a new one here. And here I could create a new IAP instance. I could call it IAP demo. Under host name, I want to give it the URL of the actual IAP. This doesn't exist, but I'm just showing you as an example. Now I have the option of either using a token I generate from within this particular IAP instance, Admin Essentials, or I can use a username and password as well. I'll just pretend a token here to put a token in here. And then finally, and this is where the ServiceNow admin can now associate particular roles with access into here. So we could add people for admin rights. We could add a group for, the networking team to have access to this, and users. Again, they're familiar with these roles. They will have defined them and associated, specific users into these roles. And then once that's done, you hit submit. Done. So you've added that IAP instance. So you, as a networking person, you could sit down with your ServiceNow admin and say, hey, let's knock these 4 IAP instances out. Let's get them onboarded. And that's pretty much it once you've configured that. So we try to make it super simple to do that. So now where we go from there is once your IAP instances are configured, if I go back to my all menu, now I can take a look at Itential Automation Services. So this is where users would find that whole self-service menu system based off of these instances that have been onboarded. So remember, the ServiceNow app, once we've installed it and configured it to speak to these IAP instances, we're going to use the Itential APIs to dynamically generate a list of all the published automations on that particular IAP. So because we have multiple IAPs here, like for instance, you could be regionally, this is for an IAP that we have for EMEA. Once I've clicked that, it's actually already done an API call into the Itential platform, assuming that your credentials are correct, and it's going to fill out this dropdown. And these are all of the published automations. So what are the things that an organization might want to do? Well, if it's self-service, what are the things that are always going on, right? Adding IP address to a firewall group to allow certain clients to go through. So this is something that's published here. You could also do network integrations to other devices and tools. Like we have the ability to integrate an automation with IP Fabric as a network, path validation and, type of a source of truth for what the network state looks like at that moment. So you can create all of these automations with Itential. Again, these exist within Itential and now are being published so that they can be used inside of ServiceNow. So again, these could be automations that are relevant for EMEA. I'm going to come here to this lab. Now we've got a lot of automations here. So this is actually pulling them up right now. And so in our lab, so this is a lab IAP that we're using. And now I have a ton of automations on here that have been published for demonstration. And so what can we do here? We have something called Application Connectivity Service. What is this? Imagine you want to because of the way we operate and you can build automations in Itential, an application connectivity service could be, hey, I'm ordering a new database or some sort of application, and that application could span across a hybrid cloud environment. It could be an AWS, but it also could have elements on your on-prem data center. You can make your forms as complex or as simple as you want, depending on who the end user is. So what if this is an end user that's in charge of a database, and he's like, hey, I need a new database. All I really need from them is, it's going to be an AWS, which region? And everything on the back end is handled by the sources of truth that we access through our automation. And so you could have something as simple as this, right? And again, this form is defined in the Itential platform and exposed here automatically. Or you could have a little more complex environment. So you could do something like create an entire lab environment. So this could be spinning up a new lab environment in your data center, or it could be in your cloud environment, or it could be both, right? And so now we've created a form that allows you to associate all kinds of information and make it really specific to this end user, because maybe this is an end user that is very technical and they want very specific places for in specific network attributes for this particular lab environment and specific types of network devices to spin up. So you can have an automation that does this. Again, it's all about self-service. What are some of the consistent or constant from a networking team type of work that creates backlog every single day, right? Something like creating a security rule, right? So we could either do it directly through a Palo Alto device or even through Panorama. You build the automation on Itential, you create the form that the user needs to fill out. Instead of running it in Itential with the ServiceNow app, they're running it from ServiceNow. So that end user doesn't need access to Itential. They're already doing things in ServiceNow. We're just making it super simple for them to create, to build what they specifically need, or to request what they specifically need from IT, in this case, network and security. So again, this gives you a lot of ideas of how this can be super useful in making your IT environment so much more efficient in how they deliver, just by allowing these kinds of automations, infrastructure automations, to be run directly from ServiceNow. Okay, so we've done a lot of work here in ServiceNow. Now I want to help you tie everything back together again. How do we build this on the back end with Itential? How do we publish an automation? How do we publish this form? And then how does it magically appear here in the ServiceNow side of things? So let's do that. So I'm going to take us through the Itential Automation Platform. So this is the Itential Automation Platform. There's different areas. When you're building automations, you're going to be spending a lot of time in Automation Studio. So that's where we're going to go first. Once we're in Automation Studio, we have a lot of elements on the left that are going to be useful in building automations. We'll use a couple of them today. I want to keep it super simple just because I want you to see the process, not necessarily the fact that we can automate basically lots and lots of different things. The point here is, how do we take an automation and publish it so that it now appears in ServiceNow using this application? So in this case, I'm going to just bring up a very simple automation that I built. So we're just going to update a network interface in this case. So this is a really simplified it's really one step. We're going to create a new or update an existing loopback interface on a Cisco iOS device. This is a go-to because it's so simple and easy for everybody to understand on the networking team, for sure, because we've done this so much in the past. But we start here. So this is the actual, I'm going to use a script to make this happen. And of course, we can, with the Itential platform, we can talk to devices directly. We can use Python, Ansible, NetMiko, all kinds of different scripts that maybe you've already written. We can import those into this platform and use them as drag and drop tasks. We normalize how you want to interact with your network infrastructure this way. And same thing with cloud, right? If you're doing cloud networking, it becomes another task that you can use on our platform in a workflow. So normalizing all that. So I'm using a script here to make a network interface change, or creating a new one if it doesn't exist. So from the command line, if I were going to do that, what would be the things, the variables, if you will, that I would need to have in order to make a network device, change a network interface device? Well, I would need to know what the router name is. So this is a variable called hosts. And the value of that variable, I'm going to show you where it comes from. But ultimately, it's going to come from the form that we're going to generate, because a user is going to have to input this information. In this particular script, this is a host, and it uses an array because this script can actually iterate over a list of hosts to apply the same set of commands to them if you want. In this case, we're only going to use a single device. So we're only going to have one host or device name in here. We're not going to use the groups here, but more critically is what's the interface name I want to make this change to? What's the port description so that we want to assign to this new interface? And then ultimately, what is the IP address and the net mask for this interface? And so once we have all of that data, right, ultimately coming from a form, then it feeds into this script, and then we execute that CLI, that series of CLI commands on a particular device that has been specified here. So I told you that's how the network changes are made. We need that information, those variables, to be assigned. They ultimately come from a form. That form I'll show you in a moment, but there's an intermediate step between the form and feeding it into this. And this is a big thing to understand, because in the world of automation, data that comes out of a particular task or an API call is not usually in the right format to pass it to another API call or task. I'll give you an example. Let's say instead of asking the user for an IP address to assign to an interface, we want to pull Netbox as our source of truth for IP addresses and say, give me the next IP address for this particular subnet or this particular region or this particular name. It's going to, I make the API call, which is a task here in the Automation Studio. It's going to return the data back to me, but in order to pass it back into the actual task that makes the network change, I might have to modify it a bit, right? I might have to change the net mask. If it's a Cisco device, it doesn't want CIDR. It wants dotted quad notation for the net mask. So I may have to make some changes to that data so that when I pass it to this next task, it's in the right format, or it's in the right method that it requires in order to make that change correctly. So that's what a transformation does. So that's what this step is here. It's simply there to take data that's going to come in from a form that a user fills out and transform that data in a way that maps back to these variables that we just looked at and put it in the right format for those variables are expecting. So what does a transformation look like? Let's see. I think I've got it. Here we go. So a transformation looks like this. So it's built on a canvas. On the left-hand side is a schema. So this is the data that's going to be coming in from our form. And the last thing we'll look at is our form. So a user is going to fill out that form information. And in that form, it's going to pass back a bunch of data to us, variables, right? It's going to pass back a variable called interface name, which is a string. It's a type string. Network device name, which is a type string. Interface description, IP address, net mask. Basically, all the information we need to pass to that network change, that green network change task that we looked at. Now, you'll notice here that we're mapping. There's no real changes to the variables. We're actually doing a straight map because it's data coming in on the left side, and then we can make the changes in the middle to the data to structure it in the right format and then map it back out on the right side so it becomes variables that we can use like in further subsequent tasks in that workflow. So when it's mapped straight through, that means that data is exactly the way I need it. But now I can use any of these elements to the right to make changes. And in this case, the only change I'm making is the network device name that gets entered into the form needs to be turned into a different type. It can't be a string. It needs to be an array, because that's what the network change task that we looked at, it requires a type array. So we have to fulfill that requirement, and it's an array with one element, one single host name in it, but it still has to be in the format of an array. Why? Because that's the way that particular script works, and that's the way it expects that data to be presented to it in order for it to make changes on a network device. And that's what we mean. That's what a transformation is. A transformation can take data. In some cases, it's exactly the way it needs to be. In other cases, it needs to be changed a little bit. In this case, it's a very simple change, or we can have lots of complex changes, right? All of these methods here are available in this area to transform that data into a variable that's useful or it's ideal, it's specific for a particular task that's later in the workflow. So that was the JST, that was the transformation, the JSON schema transformation. That's going to take the data from the form, put it in the right format. If I double click this again, then you'll see that transformation task, the data that we outputted, that's where the reference variable is coming from. So meaning when this gets run, it's going to be given the data for a device name coming from that transformation task. And that's being fed by the form. So it can do the transformation. And now we're simply mapping that data over. And now the script has everything it needs to make the network change. So the last piece is the form itself. So if I come here and I go back to Automation Studio, and this is really the critical piece, because this is really where we do a lot of fantastic things, both not only in our platform, but with ServiceNow through this form. So just like many of the elements in our platform, this is a drag and drop. You create this form as you need it. On the right-hand side, there's form elements. I can literally just drag and drop new elements into here if I want to. I can modify them as I need to, change the name so that they're more descriptive, that kind of thing. I'm not going to save this, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is. So I've already created this form, and you'll notice this is all the data that's required in order to make a network change on the device, to actually fulfill that request to make the network change. So we have the interface name, the network device, the description we want to put on the port, the IP address, the net mask. Now you'll notice here, everything is freeform text, except for this. This is a drop-down box. And you'll notice in the drop-down box, I have two devices that have been pre-populated. And I'll show you this. So because this is a drop-down, we can add options here. And I've added two options. These are two devices that are onboarded in our system. They're part of our inventory, two iOS devices that can be available. So this drop-down allows a user to pick which device they want to make a network change to an interface. This is critical because I said earlier that if you have to write custom code to do integration to ServiceNow to allow a network automation to be published in ServiceNow, a lot of that custom code could be tied to the forms. If they're generating the forms in this format, but there's no way to sync the forms up. So if I make a change to this form, if it's not updated in ServiceNow, then we could have problems, because now the automation here on this end is expecting maybe a new field. And if it doesn't get that update built, custom built in ServiceNow, then you may have problems with your automation because you're not feeding it the information it needs, or the automation may not run at all. So that's why this is critical. So now network teams can easily, quickly build forms here, update them as they want. And because the ServiceNow app does everything dynamically, it's going to see the changes that are made on this side to the form and dynamically generate the new form in the ServiceNow side. So you skip that whole need to always have custom development to keep your forms in sync. So this is a form. So when somebody enters this form, they're going to enter data just like we've asked them to. And then when they click submit or run, it's going to run the automation. So let's show you exactly how that works. So we've have this simple automation. I've taken you through the steps. The form is not as task here. The form is going to be used in our operations manager, which is where we're headed next. But I wanted you to just see the form because it's critical, and we're going to make some changes to that form in a minute. I've showed you the transformation and how it works. And now let's go to operations manager. So in operations manager, this is where we publish operations. We publish automations to be run either inside the platform or by services, systems, code outside the platform. We can also run automations as part of a scheduled event, so it can run at a specific time, or we can have it part of an event bus so it can respond to specific events. That's all done here, as well as managing the job itself. So when a job is an automation task that's running, so you can see it running in real time, or when it's completed, you can see how it ran. All of that's available in Operations Manager. So if I click here on the left side, you'll see these are all of the automations that have been published. And for this particular Itential automation platform that's been integrated into ServiceNow that we looked at, these are all the automations that are part of that populated dropdown. So these are dynamically discovered. So if I want to create a new one, I can go to create an automation, and let's create, let's see, new network interface iOS router. We're going to give it a name. So if I hit create, the first thing it's going to ask me is, what is the workflow? Okay, you're going to create a published automation. Great. What is the workflow you want to run when somebody executes this automation? So I can search through and find our new loopback interface workflow. And I believe that's what this was called. So this is the workflow that I showed you, new loopback interface. So I'll go back to Operations Manager here. Now I have to define a trigger or a method by which this needs to run. So if I click plus here, it's going to say, give me a name for this. I'm just going to call it manual because we're going to define a manual trigger. That means it runs, I have to click a button from here and it runs manually. And remember, we talked a little bit about the form, and that's a critical piece to all of this. This is where we define the form. So it's going to ask, okay, when somebody clicks the button to manually run this, what's the form I need to pop up and show them? So this is the new interface form, and it's going to, when I specify it, it's going to populate it here so we can actually see it. So that's interface name, network device name with our dropdown. There's our two elements, description, IP address, net mask. So now I get to save it. And so now the form is built. So if I was part of the networking team, I could say, hey, networking colleagues, here's a new automation that if you have access, you can run manually. And by the way, there are access controls on the ServiceNow side when we configured the IAP instances. Of course, there are access controls as well here. So publishing or not publishing, enabling or disabling, and specifying IAP users who can read and write. Give control over, the automation as it's published by the network operations team. Okay, so I can run this manually now. So if I go down here, I can run this manually, and it's going to pop up this form, right? It's going to expect me to enter this form. So I'm going to go loopback 301. I'm going to select a device. I'm going to give it an interface description. Hello world. Give it an IP address and a net mask. Now I click run manually. And now the process starts. So you'll notice this is the automation that I showed you, the workflow. So now this is a job. So it's running. So it's a job. This transformation actually took the data from our form. So remember, we filled out that form. Here's the information I put on the form. Remember, the transformation made some changes to it. So we can look at the outgoing. And one of those changes was this right here. This is the device name. It turned it into an array. But everything else was mapped as strings, just like we had defined in our transformation. And then finally, it passed that data over to the script that actually made the changes. So here's the data. You can look at the data that was passed to it. And then what happened? What was the response back when this script made the change? We got a success status when it pushed the configuration to the device. And we can go and look at that. Part of our platform is Configuration Manager, which allows us to look at network elements that have been onboarded. So in this case, here's that device. If I load the configuration, it's going to pull it up live in real time, pull the configuration in, and then we can just put an eyeball on the interfaces and see if 301, 301, here we go. Loopback 301, hello world. And here's the one we created. Okay, great. So that showed how we can do that from inside Operations Manager, and then how we can look at the job itself. Okay, now let's go back to the ServiceNow platform. Now that this has been published in our Itential platform, let me reload here. Okay, so now that we're back in the ServiceNow platform, because we've published that in IAP, we should be able to select our on-prem IAP instance. So this is this is the IAP that I published that automation in. Now it should show up in our dropdown. And so we called that new network interface iOS router. So in this case, we've automatically filled out some things. I still have the dropdown with the two elements. I'm going to give it a different description and a different IP address. Now I'll run the automation. Now that I've run the automation, again, I've run this from ServiceNow. So this is essentially what I just did inside IAP, but now I'm running it within ServiceNow as a ServiceNow user. Now, if I have access to IAP, so if I'm maybe a networking engineer that has access to the Itential platform this is running on, I can click job details and go straight into the job. And so you can see here that the job is already completed. This is that workflow that I showed earlier that makes the network change. If we just kind of peek into the network change here, and see what happened. Okay, we got a success here. So that means the interface was updated with our information. So if I go back here and load config on this device, this is the iOS CSR AWS1. It will pull that. And if we scroll down to the interface names, we should see it updated. Yep, here it is. Interface loopback 301, test description with the new IP address. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you. We were able to run that from here. I'll do a reset here because we're going to make one change. So if I go back to my form, recall what I said about how the ServiceNow app allows you to dynamically make changes as a network automation engineer or network engineer working in Itential. Something simple as a form input, right? I make a change to the form input. I don't need to have anything updated in ServiceNow because there's no need for custom code. There's no need to sync a form that's custom built in ServiceNow with what a form looks like here. And if you think about how often this could happen, if you had to engage somebody, a colleague on the ServiceNow developer team, every time you made a change to a form in order to run an automation or published a new automation with a new form, this could take lots and lots and lots of time. And it's a real blocker for IT. So instead of needing to do that, the Itential app allows us to make changes in our form and them dynamically be updated when a ServiceNow user selects that particular automation. So as an example of this in our form, this is our dropdown where I had two options. I could create some new options here. Option 3. So these are new devices here. that I want to offer. And actually, there's some other things, we won't get into it now, but it's a really cool thing. You can actually do dynamic options here. So if I click dynamic, we can do an API call. We could leverage the inventory, so through an API call, and pull the live inventory from an API call to automatically populate the drop-down box with whatever we want from that, filtered out to just maybe iOS devices, things like that. But in this case, I'm just going to add 2 elements and save that, because that would be enough to perhaps cause a form to be out of sync on ServiceNow that was custom built. That would cause an entire process to be done, time consuming, to get all the right people involved to make that change to the form. And that's a real showstopper. So now I've updated the form here. If I go back to ServiceNow, I go back to my instance, because this is a live API call. It's going to pull up the list of automations. And here we're going to select this again. And now under my network devices, it's added those 2, automatically generated them in the form fields of ServiceNow based off of the updated form that we just put together and published in the Itential platform without any custom code. So then we can do, I'll stick with the same device. On the automation from here. In this case, I'll close, because the last thing I want to show is from the ServiceNow platform, under the Itential dropdown here. Then you can see triggered jobs. And now you can actually see all the jobs from the ServiceNow side that were run and who ran them, and how they were run, as well as the specific job ID, which can get you back into the Itential platform if you have access, and which instance it was run. So there's some auditing and accountability on the ServiceNow side, so they can see how these are being used and who is using these automations as well. And I just want to say thank you very much. That concludes the demo. We appreciate everybody's time, and we look forward to seeing you again on another webinar. Goodbye.